Well, here we are in chapter 7, and I'd like to just kind of introduce you to some of the different firefighting resources. We've talked a little bit about hand crews and about the use of water, but we want to get into in this chapter the actual resources and how we use them. We're going to go through this pretty quick. There are a lot of slides, but in this chapter, we're introducing more tools of the trade, and each group, each crew is going to do a presentation on the different tools. So I'm just going to fly over these. In your groups, you're going to go in more detail. Okay, so we'll, just like we did in the first half of the semester, each group will get up and present, probably 2 per class, and we'll look at all of those different subject matters. You can find all of that on Canvas, and I'll talk about that further in the future. So, the most versatile and useful tool on the fire line is firefighters. We make it happen. The most important and valued resource is the firefighters themselves. Now, firefighters are only going to be as good as their training, their experience, but also their own personal motivation. You've got to be willing to put in the time to keep in physical shape. You've got to put in the time to know your trade, to know your job, and to learn new jobs. That's one of the things about wildland firefighting. It's so versatile, so diverse. There's so many different opportunities. So don't just think you're going to make a phone call and be a smoke jumper. You got to work your way up to that. You've got to get on a hand crew, or maybe on an engine crew, and then work your way up to a hot shot crew, and maybe get in a helitac crew, and then maybe smoke jumpers will consider taking you. Yeah, you're the key. You're the one that makes it happen. When every firefighter does their job, the fire goes out. So with experience, you learn to use your training along with all the tools of the trade. We have a lot of tools, and we need to use them in a safe and effective, efficient manner. So training, experience, motivation, supervision, that's the key to the success on the fire line. So first we're going to talk about engine companies. There are 7 basic engine company responsibilities, and I think some of these are a little redundant, but this is from the book. Every engine company needs to be able to perform the manual and skilled labor to the level of their training. There are more experienced crews and less experienced crews. So, as you learn and you get more skilled, you'll be used more. Ensure that the objectives and instructions are understood. You're responsible to work in a safe manner, and safety, remember, is the responsibility of every firefighter, not just the captain, not just the safety officer. You're responsible, and all of the crew are responsible to maintain themselves in physical condition. As I'm doing this presentation, it's spring is upon us. And as spring comes along, the days start heating up, and the engine companies, they're going to amp up their physical exercise. We would go out in boots and climb hills, throw our packs on, make sure that we were doing what was necessary to be in the kind of condition we need to be in. Each person and every engine company, as well as every member, is responsible to keep their personal clothing and their equipment in a serviceable condition. A lot of times firefighters feel like if they just leave their turnouts or their wildland gear filthy, then it kind of makes them look like they're a veteran. And that's just kind of stupid, because it's full of carcinogens and all sorts of crud, and you're breathing it into your lungs. No, keep it clean. Take care of it. If you start getting too many holes in your gear, you need to ask to have it replaced. Take care of your gear. Look sharp, be sharp. we're also responsible if we have any close calls or accidents, or an injury happens on the line. We don't keep it a secret. We tell our supervisor, and maybe we even educate others by talking about a mistake that we made. Don't be too embarrassed to do that. I've been honest in this class about some of the good things and the bad things that I've done, and I think we learned from those. So you're also responsible to report hazardous conditions to your supervisor. Maybe you see something the others don't see. So, sometimes it's best to put it in the form of a question. Hey, Cap, did you see that over there? That's not disrespectful to the captain. That's asking in a appropriate way that maybe turns the light on for your captain to see something that they didn't see, but you did. So the engine company is the most versatile firefighting resource. I wonder why I made that so bold and big letters. Might be a quiz question. The engine company is the most versatile firefighting resource. So there are a lot of different engine types, and the incident command system in the ICS, they've categorized the types of engines and apparatus based on their staffing levels, their pump capacity, and their tank capacity. Now, what you're going to find in these, we're going to go through them here in a sec, but you'll find that there are many, well, let me go to this next slide. There are many different engines, many different sizes, many different colors. I'm not a big fan of white and puke yellow that a lot of departments choose. I like good old traditional red fire engines, but it has been proven that puke yellow color is actually more recognizable to the eye. So, I guess there's a reason for going to those colors. But as I was saying, there's lots of different sizes and types and colors. Now, when ICS categorizes them, these are minimum standards for each level or for each type. So most fire engines you're going to find exceed the requirements to be of a certain type engine or apparatus. So here's a typical BLM Type 2 engine. Now, what makes it Type 2, we'll talk about in a second. Here's a basic water tender. This one looks like it's like 1,500, 2,000 gallons. Most of the time when you see a water tender, it's going to be a 4,000 gallon tender. But sometimes we have the smaller ones for rougher terrain. The 4,000 gallon water tenders, well, what's 4 times 8? Let's see, I think that's 32. So 32,000 pounds just in the water. So, it's hard to get the water tenders into really steep country. They're usually off-road vehicles, but it's a lot of weight. A lot of times our water tenders are the ones that roll over, dealing with the water. They put baffles in to try and keep it from sloshing to one side to the other. But they're very dangerous, and Ventura County had a firefighter die just a few years ago in a water tender rollover. So we take driving these vehicles very seriously, water tenders especially, because of the weight issues that they have. Here's a CDF Type 3 engine, very common off-road out in the wildland fire. The Type 3 engines are very much a preferred engine in wildland, but we're going to find that just like in Ventura County, Ventura City, LA County, LA City, most of the time the municipal fire departments are going to have Type 1 engines, not Type 3, because they're limited in their use. They're very good for wildland. They're not so great for just everyday city uses and traffic accidents, EMS, and all the stuff that the city firefighters might have to do. Okay, I had to take a little break there. I had something I had to fix. Hopefully everything still sounds good. One of my mics was doing something funny. So this is a Type 6 engine. Like I said, there's so many different things out there. Type 5, 6, and 7 are more like pickup trucks with a pump on them. And again, we'll look at those standards in just a second. But this just looks like a pickup truck that they put a water tank, some hose, and a pump on. And that is what it is. The next couple of pictures are some apparatus out of South Africa. So, you know, the variety of engines and uses, types, they're as various as you can come up with. So in South Africa, they have a lot of like prairie land, rolling hills with tons of dead grass, and they get these big grass fires. And it's similar to Australia and the flatter parts of California where they get these wildland fires. Well, they've come up with lots of different types of apparatus where they put a dozer on top of a off-road vehicle and also added a tank and a pump and hose. And this is kind of a 4-in-1. So instead of just being a triple, which we refer to as an apparatus that has a tank, hose, and a pump, well, this is a quadruple. So it has a dozer skid in the front, you know, so it can do scraping. Here's another South African rig that's very much made for being off-road. I like this next one. They've got a couple of reel lines. They got, looks like 4 reel lines, but they also have seating, outdoor seating for multiple personnel. And again, it's very much set up for off-road with a high clearance. And, you know, it's not something you might see around the U.S., but kind of cool, these different ideas that they've come up with that works with the kind of terrain and the kind of fires that they fight there in South Africa. So I told you we'd get to the types. So this is a listing of the 7 ICS types of engines. And we'll go through most of them, but notice that a Type 1 engine has to be able to have the capacity for 1,000 gallons a minute from its pump, a tank that holds 400, and then in 2.5 hose, 1,200 feet minimum, 1.5 hose or 1.75, 400 feet minimum. It should have some 1-inch hose, but there isn't a minimum there. At least 48 feet in ladders and a staffing of 4. So when a incident commander asks for a strike team, they're always going to be asked, well, what type? And usually they already say that, but they'll say, I need 5 strike teams, Type 1 engines. And that means they want city rigs like this with a staffing of 4. They also might say, I need 5 strike teams, Type 3 engines. You know, it's going to depend. But I brought up the Type 1 because I want to point out to you, in LA County Fire, where I worked, our pumps always had a 1,200, 1,250 gallon per minute capacity. Our tanks were 500 gallons. We usually had somewhere between 600 and 800 feet of 4-inch hose, and then 600 to 800 feet of 2.5-inch hose. So we were exceeding this 1,200 feet at 2.5-inch hose. And then 1.75 inch, again, we're exceeding. We have more than what it requires. We would have, gosh, on my rig, we had 600, 900 feet at 1.5 inch that was pre-connected and ready to go. We had 600 feet pre-connected and ready to go of inch, even though it wasn't required. And we would have multiple bags of Wildland hose packs that exceeded that. Our ladders was 124, and a whole bunch of others that, exceeded what they were asking us for in ladders. Sorry, my phone was ringing in the background. So there's type 2 engines. Now, let's look at these. But notice that 4, 5, 6, and 7, these are all smaller vehicles with maybe a larger capacity of water, but not much of a pump and not a lot of hose. So you're going to see a lot of vehicles that are out there in the 4, 5, 6, and 7 range that LA City calls them plug buggies. LA County called them patrols. They're more like pickup trucks with the ability to pump and have some water. So let's look at some type 1s. So the type 1 rig is, like I said, minimum of 1,000 gallons per minute, 400 gallons of water. And, different people look at them and say, well, why would you ever use that on a brush fire? The lower clearance, and it's true. They're not spectacular off-road. There were times where with my rig, I couldn't get across creek beds, or, I had to take it at a really weird angle to get up some hill or whatever. They're not made for off-road, but we use them off-road a lot. So why does LA County buy only type 1 engines? I think there might be 1 or 2 type 3s. I know there's some type 3s that belong to the state that are housed at county stations, but we don't really buy type 3s. Well, why is that? It's because of versatility. I can use this on a wildland fire, even though it's not ideal. But I can also use it on any structure fire, on any traffic accident, on any EMS call. It's very versatile and can do many, many things. They have master stream devices. Now it says with at least a capacity of 500 GPM. I had the capacity of 1,000 GPM. We were staffed with 3 at the station that I worked at, and sometimes we get a 4th person during wildland season. But if we were called forth as part of the strike team, we had to pick up a 4th member, because then we would be meeting the specifications of a type 1 engine. So type 1s are versatile and are probably the most common, not probably, they are the most common rigs bought by municipalities, but sometimes they can't afford type 1s. So in smaller fire departments or volunteer fire departments, a lot of times they'll go to these type 2 fire engines, and they're a little smaller pump capacity, same size water tank, not as much hose required, not as much staffing required, 3 people minimum. And so the ladder's not as much, but they cost less. And this is one that was probably part of a volunteer fire department. And you can see smaller, not as big a seating area for the crew, etc. So that's a typical type 2. Type 3, very much the rig to have on a wildland fire. You can right off, you look at it, higher clearance, more off-road capacity, not as much of a large amount of gallons per minute, but many of them have a higher PSI that they can go to, because they need to run these wildland hose lays up and over hills, and they're dealing with higher pressures. The 500-gallon water tank is a minimum. I've seen them with 600. 1,000 feet, 1.5 inches, and 800 feet of inch is a minimum. They always have more, and they're staffed by at least 3 people. This is a CAL FIRE rig. Looks like a beautiful rig. Again, type 3s are awesome for the wildland. I wish I had one. I wish I drove one, but because I worked for LA County Fire, it was a Type 1. Here's another Type 3 U.S. Forest Service. Similar, different color. Has a nice crew cab. Sometimes they'll show up with 5 or 6, but the staffing is usually 4. Now, I didn't go into all the 5, 6, and 7s. As I said, they're basically pickups, patrols. If we are going to do a mobile attack, we have to have an engine that can do mobile attack. And so it needs to be able to have the capacity to go off-road. And maybe you remember in the previous lecture I talked about if you're going to be able to have a mobile attack, you have to have 3 things. You have to have the kind of engine that has pump and roll capacity. So you also need to be in terrain where you can drive terrain and fuel. So in the next slide, it talks about can only be used when fuels are light and topography allows maneuverability. And as I said, the engine has to have pump and roll. But there's also another factor that isn't mentioned in the book, but the soil has to be correct too. You don't want to go out there and get stuck, and we talked about that last week. So you want to match the equipment to the task. We're not going to get all into a PTO pump in this lecture, but we might talk about it later, and pumping capacity. But PTO pumps give an engine the ability to drive and pump. Our main pump on most engines do not give it that ability. You're either in pump or you're in drive. There isn't both. So the power takeoff, PTO stands for power takeoff, gives the ability to do that. So as I mentioned, our author is a CAL FIRE guy and was on a Type 3 engine. And so he kind of is making fun here when he says the large road queen should stay on the pavement. Well, you know what? I drove my Road Queen a lot of off-road, drove it in some pretty rough terrain, and we'd make it work. And if we couldn't, we knew that, okay, that's beyond our capacity. We can't do it. But most of the time, I got there. So some of that is the ability of the driver. Some of it is the limitations of the rig. We're just going to do what we can. But if the fuel and terrain allow it and the equipment is correct, you've got a PTO, I would drive that rig off-road and pump and roll if the terrain was the right terrain. So if we do that, if we do a mobile attack, the firefighter, if they're walking alongside, now in the old days, sometimes we'd have the firefighter on the running board holding on. OSHA gets really upset if we do that. So now the firefighter will walk alongside, but and then this was a pet peeve of mine. I want to see you. I don't want to run over you. Okay, so it's really bad for your reputation when you've killed one of your own guys, or maimed them. So you don't want to do that. So the firefighter needs to be in view. There's the different tactics. Just like these tactics are similar when we were talking about doing a fire line or firing out operation. Sometimes we want to flank it, and we're going to send engines on one side and the other and come around until we reach the head. Sometimes we do tandem where one goes and then another follows. One's just doing a knockdown and the other one is cleaning up. Sometimes we do a pincer movement where we come in from the sides and pinch off the head. And then sometimes there's an envelopment where they all go to different parts and each one enveloping a fire. So, different tactics. Most of the time, it's a flanking pincer movement. but you want to have a good anchor point and work out from there. And if the terrain allows it, we'll do mobile attack. If not, we're going to go back to the very basics, and we're going to attack it with progressive hose lays. So we're going to anchor it, we're going to flank it, and we're going to continue to work our way around the fire. So whether, like the top picture, we've got crews that are advancing progressive hose lays, or whether we're like the bottom picture where we are doing a mobile attack and motoring around, either way, it's a similar tactic, just one, it's more manpower. So last week we also talked about all the different kinds of hose packs and different ways of doing the hose lays. We usually do them with an 1.5 inch single jack hose. Well, we're always going to do that for wildland. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said usually. Always going to do single jacket hose. Most of the hose these days is made out of a polyester type of material. It's lightweight. If you've got brass couplings on it, just leave that back at the fire station. Use the ones with Pyrolite. They're much lighter. So the synthetic hose is lighter and is more versatile, but because it is single jacket, it is easier to rupture from either abrasion or from heat. So you want to make sure that you're taking good care of it. You want to dry it before you store it. So whenever we'd come back from a fire, we'd lay out all the hose and we'd rinse it. Then we'd flip it. Then we'd rinse the other side, taking brushes to it, knocking off the chunks of dirt and everything. And then we'd hang it in the hose tower. And yeah, after a hard day's work at a wildland fire, you still got to take care of your equipment. You clean it and hang it before you go to bed. Yes, there are some exceptions when it's 1 a.m. in the morning and we do it the next morning, or the next crew would have to do it. But the one thing you don't do is you never go without reloading new hose into the rig, because you never know if you're going to get another fire. So we'd come back, we'd reload the engine, we'd clean the hose we'd used on the fire that we were on, hang it, and once we're all ready to go for the next fire and everything is put away, that's when you can go take a shower and relax. So the hoses come in 50 or 100-foot lengths like we looked at in the bunker last week. It's rolled into donuts or put into different kinds of accordion lays. We looked at some different videos about that, and those are on Canvas if you want to look at them, or in YouTube. There's many different packs, many different ways to do this. The Smoky pack, the Ganser pack, which I never pronounce right, Ganser. LA County used donuts for a long time, and then they went to something like the one on the bottom. It changes, every couple of years. It's just a lot of different ways to skin this cat. Hose reels and booster lines. We've mentioned these a little bit, but here's a typical hose reel with a rubber hose on it. And as I mentioned the other day, they should never be used for a progressive hose lay, but they can be used for quick attack, for mobile attack, or for improving your anchor point. So that's going to be a small amount of water. It's 1-inch hose. It's going to be 20 to 60 GPM nozzle on it, but they can really help you if there's a little, fire near the engine. You can run after it and catch it really quickly. It's a great tool for our small fires or for improving the anchor point on our big fires. I use the booster line all the time. I'm not like our author is not a big fan of booster lines. I think they're very versatile. I love it when we can catch a fire and keep it small instead of big. So the reel lines, they're easy to deploy, easy also to retrieve. They have a motor where you can, you put your foot on it. It's usually under the running board, and as you put your foot on it, there's a little motor and it spins and it pulls the hose back onto the hose reel. You want to do it in a nice, neat manner. You should have some good leather gloves on to protect your hands. And if you have time, rinse off the hose before you put it back in the reel line. And you can very quickly deploy them and retrieve them, which makes them great for wildland urban interface firefighting, and for chasing fires and then moving to the next spot. So use them during mop-up, use them in situations where water volume isn't as critical. And you never use it to start an extended hose lay, but you can use it to fight fire more than our author says. There's a lot of different ways of putting these all together, but most of the time you're going to see Ys and Ts. So I like the Ys because of the handles, but sometimes the handles can get caught on things, and they are bigger and bulkier in your pack, but still I felt that they were more versatile. The Ts, more compact, but and I just didn't find them as resourceful. Now you got to remember that on wildland hose we have iron pipe thread, and a lot of times we start our hose lines with a national standard thread, which all your 2.5, 4, 1.5 for pre-connect are all going to be national standard. So you need to make sure you got some extra fittings in your pocket in case you need to switch over. I always carried iron pipe to national standard to iron pipe, and I'd connect them together, and then I'd have 1.5 ones and inch ones, and I'd just kind of connect them together and throw them in my pack. Nozzle types, we looked at some nozzles last week. This is one of the U.S. Forest ones that gives a nice straight bore and a spray. But the little ones, like I showed you, that turn and take you from lower gallons to higher gallons, from spray to straight stream, they're really great. They're very versatile. So you might want to have a spanner with you in your pack as well. They're very helpful when you have to shut down the line really fast. And you don't want to waste this water. So if you have a break in the line, you want to clamp it really quick, get rid of the hose that's got a hole in it, put some more hose in, and try not to lose water. They also mentioned their spanner wrench. I carried a little spanner with me. Sometimes they're so tight together and you know your hands are tired. A little spanner will help you. You got to consider head pressure, and I mentioned this again a couple weeks ago. It says here for every 1 foot in elevation, there's a change of 0.43 pounds per square inch. So some of you math geniuses can use that 0.43 pounds. I'm going to say ½ pound per foot. It's just easier. And so if you have to be exact, 43 pounds per 100 feet of elevation. But most engineers, they would say 50. And it's just a matter of rounding it off. And you're going to be accurate by being over guessing the head pressure. I'd rather do that than be under. So ½ pound per foot. It works for me. Hope it works for you. The nozzles require 100 psi at the nozzle. So you got to figure out the pressure between your engine and the nozzle, because you're going to have friction loss with 1 inch hose. It's a lot of friction loss. and you're going to have head pressure. So if you are using a straight stream nozzle, you can use 50 pounds pressure, but when you have a straight stream nozzle, now you don't have the ability to use a spray. So most of the times we're going to use the combo nozzles that have both spray, fog, and straight stream capacity, and they need 100 pounds pressure. So simple hose lay is laid from the pump to the point of the fire, and it's just going to keep on progressing as you add more and more hose at each T or at each Y. Now the T's and Y's, some departments will space them as close together as 100 every 100 feet, sometimes 300 feet, 200 feet. It's going to depend. You should never do more than 300 feet. So once the hose is ready, some of them you lay them out and they're in a circle, and you open it up and it pops up, and then you can continue to advance. Others, they lay the hose out before they charge that hose, and they just keep progressing. So the hose diameter is dictated by the length of the hose lay, the change in elevation, and the water volume desired. We're almost always going to try and fight these wildland fires with 1.5 inches as a trunk line, inch as either fire attack or mop-up line. Try and stay away from anything that could cut your hose. That's sharp rocks. Of course, you want to cool down the edge enough to where your hose is not going to get burned through. And if you ever have to drive over hose, do not drive over the couplings, but really try not to drive over hose. We try and lay the hose in such a way that it's not going to be going across roads, but if you have to drive over it, do it carefully and don't drive over the couplings. So progressive hose lays, we're going to progressively be applying water and making ourselves a trunk line, and it's acting like a standpipe in a building. It's just like making a pipe that takes the water to where the fire is. So we want to contain and control the fire, and we'll place those Y's and T's at 200 to 300 feet. And you want to make sure that you've got that water. If your engine runs out of water, then you stop. You can go forward with hand tools, but don't go forward with the hose unless it's got water in it. Sometimes, I had to call my crew and say, hey, I'm waiting for the water tender to bring me more water. And we're just kind of stalled until they came. So you want to make sure that you are not going forward when you don't have water. As I said before, you want to anchor any progressive hose lay. Keep the hose line free of kinks. Keep it cool the line so it doesn't get burned, and that's kind of a redundant slide. No, you need to know how much water you have, and I would, communicate with my crews, hey, we're down to a quarter tank or whatever. You could also use hand signs where, you blow a whistle or you whistle, get their attention, and you use your arm. And if you put it halfway up your arm, that means I have half a tank. Or if you put it at a quarter way, I'm down to a quarter tank. But usually we could communicate that over the radio. Progressive hose lays are manpower intensive. The hose is hard to drag through the dirt and the brush, and as it gets filled with water, it gets kind of heavy. So, and you're usually going uphill. Let's face it, there's a lot of work to it. Well, how are we going to get more water if we are struggling with water issues? Because there just aren't hydrants out there in the middle of nowhere. So there's a lot of different ways. Here's a gravity sock, and it's a canvas device that can be placed in a stream, but it is dependent on gravity. So the water source has to be higher than the engine. So if there's at least a 100-foot drop in elevation between the gravity sock and a nozzle, you can actually use this and hose straight to the fire because you're going to get 50 psi out of the gravity suck. You can use it to supply an engine or a hose line by throwing it, taking it upstream and having it flow in. It's not the most common thing, but U.S. Forest Service use these. The ejectors and eductors, again, we're going to have crews that are going to present on this, but an ejector is something that the U.S. Forest Service uses more. I'm going to show you in the next slide an eductor that Ventura County, LA County have these eductors. What they are, they use the Venturi system. They use water to draw water. So if you look at how it's configured, there's one line going into it, and that water is going to go and flow by, and as it flows by the middle portion there, it uses the Venturi effect where the high pressure is going by and water gets drawn in. So you're taking water from your engine, pumping it to the ejector that's sitting in a pool or in a river or in a lake. And as the water goes by, it draws more water and brings more water back to the engine. So in this one, it's set up for using inch and inch and a half. Inch to take the water to it, and inch and a half to bring more water back to the apparatus. So it can be used to fill an engine when the water source is too far to reach with the suction hose, and the suction is usually you can't lift more than 12 feet in elevation, and usually you're going to have 2 8-footers or so. It's pretty hard to use a suction unless you are right next to the water source. This is a great tool that LA County and Ventura County use, the eductor. And you can see in this one, you're using bigger hose. So it's going to be 1 3/4 or 1.5 inch hose that goes to the device. The device is dropped into a pool. So like in the Thomas Fire, if some of the apparatus had these when they ran out of water because electricity went out, the tanks went dry, and the fire engines couldn't use the hydrants, and they were out of water. Well, if you have one of these, you can use the pools in the community. So they will go up to 150 feet away, and 1.5 inches, like I said, going to where the Venturi portion is in the middle there, and it goes and gets turned around the corner, and as it goes back through 2.5. And that draws water through. You want to have that that screen on there so that you're not drawing up rocks and stuff if you're using a riverbed. You can actually use a rope and drop it down to the bottom and then pull it up a little bit and then tie it off. But in a pool, boy, just drop it in the bottom, and you can suck a lot of water out of a pool by using one of these guys. You can be out in the front of the house, whereas normally with a suction, you would have to be able to get next to the pool. Here, I can be all the way out in front of the house up to 150 feet away. You have to do it before you run out of the water, though, because you have to have water to get water. Okay, let's just look at some different wildland tools. We have looked at some, but I want to just run through these real quick. That's a back pump there on top, and I showed you a kind of a plastic one or a canvas one last week, and this is, I mentioned that there are some that are made out of metal that are heavier, but they're out there. They're older. Most people are using the more collapsible canvas ones with a bladder in them. Sometimes we do need ladders if we have ladder companies or a regular engine that has ladders. We sometimes we got to use the ladders if we've got the fires getting into buildings, but we can use the ladders sometimes to get up a really steep little cliff off the road to just get ourselves to where the fire is. Power tools, firing tools, we've got a lot of different tools, and as you see that Pulaski down there on the bottom. So we have cutting and scraping tools, And we looked at some of these before: McLeods, Pulaskis, shovels, rhinos, combis. There's a lot of different new ones. If you carry a McLeod, you want to carry it with the rake side down. You don't want to fall on the rake side because it'll puncture you. Most tools, you carry them with the sharp side away from you. So you carry it at a balance point on the downhill side. If you are falling down, try and cast it away from you as you're falling down. In a hand crew, usually we try and keep a spacing of about 10 feet. When you're walking and working, you sometimes need to pass someone. If you do, there's a lot of different ways to say it, but different crews have different statements that they'll say: coming through, timber by, lumber by. Whatever it might be that your crew uses, you need to call out and wait for a safe passage. I got hit in the head by a rubbish hook handle once that somebody was being a little wild. We were working on a roof, and it does not feel good. I've still got a bad neck from it. So you want to wait until that person kind of hesitates on their work, lets you by, and then they go back to work so you don't get an axe in the head or something like that. So you want to place your unused hand tools in a tool pool where you can keep them safely away from foot traffic, but they're there if you need, if your handle breaks and you go back and get another tool. You can attach guards and flag tools as necessary. So on top, we have a double bit axe. There's fireman's axe. There's different kinds of axes, but these are great if the chainsaw goes down. I like the one on the bottom. I like the look of it. It's kind of chrome and cool. So you want to cover the cutting edges with tape or plastic after you sharpen them so you don't accidentally cut yourself. There's that rubbish hook. I told you I thought it would be great for a horror movie. But they can cut down, thicker, small trees, thicker brush. And you can put a little momentum into them. You want to have a nice cutting edge on them. You need to learn how to swing either an axe or these. You don't want to try and look like Paul Bunyan. Small, short chops are actually more effective and less telling on your energy level. There's Pulaski on top. Thank you, Ed Pulaski. The axe blade is sharpened like any other axe. And then it's a grubbing, trenching, prying, and scraping tool. Very versatile, widely used on hand crews across the U.S. and around the world. Shovel, like I said, super versatile. You can use it to throw dirt, dig, scrape, cut, trench, carry, smother, rake, shield. It's very versatile. If you keep a kind of a sharp edge on it, you can even take out smaller brush with it with a nice swing. Shovels, whether the long handle or the ladies handle or short handle, as we politically say today, are both very, very versatile tools. The McLeod, you want to keep the scraping side nice and sharp. You can use it also for smaller brush to knock down, take a chopping motion at it. But most of the time you use it like the hoe edge for scraping and the raking side for breaking up grass or whatever, or pulling away leaves and stuff like a rake. So, you use a McLeod in the grass. It's very, very good for grass fires and can really fast clear a lot of grass area with a McLeod because of the width of the scraping tool, and you can use it for trenching and other things. So hand saws and chainsaws, you're never going to see these babies up on top anymore, but they are really cool when you use them. I got to use one of these at a fall festival fair, and it's not as easy as it looks. You got to pull only. So your partner pulls, you pull. partner pulls, you pull. You give, you never push. You give as the other person pulls. And if you if you push instead of give, you bend the saw and you stop the operation. So it's just pull, 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 pull. Sometimes there are hand crews out there that know they're going to be in heavy brush, and they want to have it as an option if the chainsaws go down. I haven't seen a crew do that in forever, but it's possible. Chainsaws, awesome, powerful tool, but you got to be trained. You need to be trained as a sawyer if you're going to use a chainsaw. When you're using a back pump, you want to be careful with the back pump. If you're climbing over things, you can puncture it. It can cause you to lose your balance. You can put a little bit of foam in there, Class A foam concentrate, and it'll make it go further. But remember, it's not a lot of water. It's 5 gallons. So you want to use it wisely, not widely, wisely, where you stir things up and then you squirt a little water. Here's that other kind that I talked about, the plastic or canvas, where they can be folded down when they're not in use. And most of these do have a little way to use a spray or a straight stream. Portable pumps there's the Mark III and the Mark V, I think they call them. There's a lot of different versions and makers of these. They're good for when you don't have an engine, you are near a water source, and you have a hand crew, and there's submersible types and there's floating types. There's some that you keep to the side and have to get a good suction. So they're not the most reliable. Again, we're going to have a presentation on this, so I'm not going to go deep into them. There are some pictures also on Canvas if you want to see some pictures of them in action. Drip torch, we're going to have a presentation on this. So my main point is this is the most efficient way to do firing out using a drip torch. You're going to mix 4 parts diesel with 1 part gasoline. You always want to wear gloves. You want to put the drip torch out when it's not being used. Don't use it to point, because if you kind of flip it and say, hey, you need to go over there, well, it's going to squirt the fuel on fire all over the place. So you don't want to do that. You want to be really circumspect to the people around you and what you're doing, and remember that this is a very dangerous tool that can burn people. Be smart about it. You carry it in an upright position until it's ready to be used. You extinguish it when it's not in use. Don't touch it until it cools down. Keep it away from your clothing, and always have an escape route planned in case fire turns on you, wind changes. Fusees, key points when you're using a fusee: when you ignite it, turn your face away. This stuff is toxic for you to breathe, so don't be breathing it. Keep it away from you. Stay upwind, not downwind. Keep it away from your body and clothing. That phosphorus material, if it gets on you, it's 1400 degrees and it does drip when it's burning. You don't want to stare at it. It's really bad for your eyes. So you want to use the little cardboard attachment when you're going to be using it, and it'll get it further away from you and a little bit safer to use. So fusees have that. And remember, I talked about fusees are bigger and more for use in firing out operations, whereas a flare is best used on the side of the road for warning people, but can be used for smaller firing out operations. If it's all you have, use a flare, but a fusee is a better tool. Almost done here. There's all sorts of great firing devices. We're going to have a presentation on this, but there's flare guns, napalm grenades, Terra torch, super cool. It's like a rolling flamethrower. Helitorch, you can see there on the bottom right. And aerial ignition devices, that's the bottom left. That goes in a helicopter, and these little balls drop out of the copter, and they're injected with glycol, and they light on fire, and they drop out in little fiery balls, and when used properly, are great for firing operations. We talked about hand crews. They're going to work together with the hose crews, and they can do firing operations, but mostly what they do is scratching a good fire line to mineral soil. They're very helpful in mopping up and cleaning up. Our book has some statistics of production rates. You can read that in the book. Okay, last couple of things. Air tankers and helicopters, they deliver, and we've got dozers too, deliver retardant, and every retardant line has to be followed up with a fire line, and they're very effective during initial attack. And a lot of times you'll have your aircraft diverted when you're deep into a fire if another fire starts, because they're really effective at the beginning of a fire and can help keep our fires small. They basically have one purpose: to deliver fire retardant or suppressant to the fire line, but aircraft are used for smoke jumpers, but it's a different kind of aircraft. It's not an air tanker. So they're most effective on initial attack operations or in helping slow down a fire in big operations. They need to be followed up. The retardant's not going to put a fire out, it's going to slow it down. Our helicopters, super efficient, close up, tactical support with water, foam, or retardant. They can move personnel, they can transport supplies, they can be used for firing operations either with a helitorch or with those air ignition devices. They can evacuate our injured. They can assist with reconnaissance. They are versatile. Very, very effective tool. However, one of the most expensive tools on the fire line. So we need to be aware of their limitations. So in steep terrain, in winds over 20 miles per hour, it really has a negative effect on our aircraft limitations. Our aircraft tankers with heavy winds, they're going to drop, and a lot of the material does not reach the ground effectively. Shadows, especially in the morning and the evening, affect their visibility. They're very, very concerned about power lines, tall trees or snags. These are things that bring helicopters and planes down. LA County Fire had a helicopter go down from just a little old telephone line that had not been in use for like a century. Nobody even knew it was there. And he was flying along, caught it, and it brought him to the ground immediately. The pilot survived. Elevation is an issue. Visibility with smoke and dense. Remember when we talked about stable air? It's great because they can attack, but the visibility is going to be worse if the smoke is laying down. Extreme fire behavior can create some really serious convection, which affects their ability to fly. And with the tankers, you can have a pretty excessive turnaround time. Helicopters usually will set up a helispot closer to the fire, and the turnaround time isn't as bad. We are done. Yay! Okay, I'll not see you next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and thanks for listening.